Welcome, everybody, to the Celtics Blog Podcast. It's Bobby Manning here on a Tuesday night. This will be dropping Wednesday, and as you know by now, if you ever arrive at CelticsBlog.com, if you checked it out at all this week, you know it is 76ers week, so the Celtics Blog Podcast is joining the party, and to do so, we have two guests here from the Liberty Ballers. I'm going to be holding it down for the Celtics side alone tonight, which is a scary thought. On the 76ers side, we have two guests, Sean Kennedy and Kevin F. Love. Not that Kevin Love, the other Kevin Love. They're both here representing the 76ers, and we're going to have a nice chat tonight. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us on, Bobby. I'm excited to chat a little bit about this rivalry.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Is this a little overconfidence on this part, on your part, that you think you can go 2-on-1 right here and take us on?
I've done it before on the basketball court. I'm pretty good at the 1-on-2, so we'll try it on the podcast as well. Kevin, you've probably been asked this a million times, but how's life in the basketball world with the name Kevin Love, especially as a Sixers fan?
I mean, it's not bad, you know. I mean, it gives me kind of an instant credibility until people actually see my frame and that I'm about 8 inches to probably, 10 inches shorter than the real Kevin Love. Actually, let me rephrase that. The other Kevin Love, I believe his parents named him after me. So, I've been using it to my advantage as much as I can.
Sean, what are you most excited for about this season in particular? Because I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I don't know if I'm the first one to tell you this, but the 76ers didn't exactly make any big-time splashes this summer. No LeBron James, no Paul George, which probably hurt more than anything because I thought the Sixers had a real chance at getting him. And no Kawhi Leonard in the end. You're coming away with Wilson Chandler? That's nice, but nothing.
Don't remind me.
Yeah, Bobby. I mean, they got a few bench pieces. I think their depth should be a little better this year, which is great. But yeah, the star hunting didn't quite work out as everybody hoped. That's been talked to death already. We all know that. But I think the part of Brett Brown's statement that everybody forgets is the star developing. So that's what I'm really looking forward to this season. I'm looking forward to seeing Simmons maybe start to explore taking jump shots every once in a while and see what that does to open up his game offensively. I want to see Embiid take a little bit better care of the ball and work on his passing out of the post and off the little dribble drive game that he has going. Both those guys were great defenders last year. Embiid, of course, was a runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year, and Ben Simmons got a few down-ballot votes for all defense. So just seeing two young guys play like that on both ends of the court is something I'm looking forward to. And then, of course, the great unknown, Markelle Fultz. We had the Drew Hanlon hype machine in full gear all summer long.
Which I love.
Yeah, he's saying he could be an all-star. I don't know. I'm not going to go that far, obviously, in his first year. Yeah, I just want to see Markelle Fultz that we saw out of Washington. There was a reason he was the first overall pick, and he was a consensus first overall pick, not a guy that people thought was a reach. So I want to see Fultz back and unhypnotized, unbrainwashed, forgetting how to shoot, and I want to see him back, the player we thought he was capable of when we took him first overall.
Sean, did you say consensus number 1 overall pick, unlike that other Celtics player that wasn't the consensus number 1 overall pick?
Hey, Jayson Tatum's a great player, but if you go and you look at all the draft boards and mock drafts heading into that draft, I think 9 out of 10 had Markelle Fultz as the number 1 pick.
And the other one was Danny Ainge.
Yep. Hey, man, that's what you got to do sometimes. You got to go against the grain, and that's how you get value in this league. So, hey, kudos to him for taking Tatum. I don't know if I completely buy the fact that Tatum was number 1 regardless on their board, or they're just saying that after the fact because they did the trade down and it happened to work out for them. But either way, it was a great pick by him. You got to tip your cap to Danny Ainge, but yeah, I think we're still excited to see what Fultz has to offer.
And that's where this whole thing started, right? Right after that trade happened with the 76ers and Celtics, it was like buildings burning down in Boston. Everybody's like, what's going on? Because Fultz came to the Garden. Pretty much everybody had him coming to Boston. And all of a sudden, that's out the window. The Sixers are going to get Fultz. It looked like he was going to be the splashy first-year addition for them that was going to transform their point guard position. Ultimately, that didn't come to fruition, as we know by how the season panned out. But I was talking to Trevor Lane about this a couple episodes ago, because you don't hear too much about the Lakers in that whole discussion. Like, they could have had Jayson Tatum too, but they were all in on Lonzo Ball. I'll ask you guys, is there any amount of regret in not taking Tatum? If you had to go back and do it again, would any part of you consider taking Tatum number 1 overall?
Leading into the draft, I wasn't very big on Tatum, and now I can see that I'm totally wrong. And I don't know. You look at his skill set, and I think he could fit in pretty seamlessly with this Sixers team. So you kind of see, especially in the playoffs, what Tatum's contributing, and you wish you could have that out of Fultz, at least as far as the production level. So there's a little regret as far as you just look at him, and it's like, wow, this kid could have fit in perfectly with this Sixers team. But at the same time, I say perfectly, and that's not really, the right word to talk about Tatum with. I mean, he would fit in very well with this Sixers team just because of the way he can get his own bucket, and the Sixers do need that. But if Fultz can be the player that we saw at Washington, I'll still take that 10 times out of 10 just because it allows Ben Simmons to relieve himself of some pressure. And that's really what I think Ben needs. We saw in the Celtics series alone just how they can back off Ben, and that really kind of relegates him to a role where he can't thrive. So I would say there's not yet regret that we didn't end up with Tatum because of how well the theory of Fultz fits in with Ben Simmons, and it kind of gives you 2 point guards on the court at the same time if they can play off each other. So regret, not yet, but I definitely could see how Tatum would have fit in pretty well with this Sixers team. And if Fultz doesn't show me something this season, then yeah, by the end of the season, there will definitely be a whole lot of regret that the Sixers not only passed on Tatum, but gave up an asset in the process of doing so.
That Kings pick's coming our way, baby.
Oh man, that's going to be lingering over me all summer. I mean, all season. I think I'll be paying attention to the Kings just as much as I'll be paying attention to the Sixers this season.
And you still look back.
Yeah, we still have that top 1 protection.
That is true. That was very key. I gave the Sixers big credit for slipping that in there because the Kings could win the lottery this year. There's new odds and everything like that. But that's going to be huge. If it pans out that the Sixers end up getting the number 1 pick next year, by some chance, I think it's like I don't have the percentages in front of me, but if you're in the top 3, I think it's equal, like 15% each way or something like that. But that'll be a substantial boost for them looking back on that trade. And it is still so early in that trade's history, but that's what we're going to look back on as this rivalry starts brewing for what looks like going to be the next decade or so. Is that initial point where the Sixers go with Fultz, Celtics go with Tatum. I've been big on Tatum for a while. I got to see him play up at Syracuse. The way he just looked like the most transcendent player on the court, like he didn't belong there, really struck me in that game. But I still love Fultz. The what he went through last year was so weird, but I see the way he glides on the court and how well he moves on the ball and how good his basketball sense is elsewhere aside from all the shooting concerns. And those are massive concerns. But everything else for him looks good to me. I love his frame as a defender. I think he has enough feet fluidity to be a good defender at the point guard position. I love him as a passer. It is a little bit awkward there, the lineup, the way they've constructed it. Like, I'm not opposed to having multiple ball handlers. In fact, I think that's a great thing. But where Simmons dominates the ball so much, and he doesn't strike me as a great player off the ball, I think that can be a little bit awkward when they're both out there together.
Yeah, it's definitely an area where Simmons could stand to improve, and I think we didn't get to see it as much last season just because they didn't really have that secondary ball handler to let him kind of develop that part of his game.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's not going to be a guy that stands outside the three-point line and spaces the floor. But I think an area they could really look to utilize him is as the pick part of the pick and roll. I mean, it's easy to forget because he's a point guard, but he's a legitimate 6'10" player, and having him and a real point guard, if that's what Fultz turns out to be, that would be just a dynamite combination. You could have Simmons do that kind of short roll that Draymond Green does with the Warriors, and with his playmaking ability, that could be a deadly thing to utilize with them. And also, he has to work on his cutting and getting to the basket. And, with his ability to finish, that's another place that he could really be an asset on the offensive end. So there's ways he could improve, but I think he's still a work in progress in that area.
And I mean, to build on what Sean just said, I think Ben really needs to get comfortable getting into the post, getting deep into the post, and becoming a passer out of the post, especially for those small ball lineups when they want to take Embiid off the court. I'm not saying Ben could play center. I mean, maybe he could, maybe he couldn't. But really what he needs to develop this season, if he's going to play with Fultz, is his ability to get deep into the post and pass out of the post if people are going to collapse on him or just find cutters. Because I think if he can be comfortable in that role, getting down in the post and being that passer, I think that's really how him and Fultz are going to be able to play off each other. But until then, you're right. It's an odd kind of roster construction for now if Ben isn't going to take that leap as either a cutter or a post passer and be able to kind of man the five on defense when Joel is off the court.
It is a weird-looking roster. It really is. And you have such phenomenal big men. I love what they're doing at the 5, at the 4 with Simmons there. And even Simmons playing the 1 out of the 4 position is an interesting thing in today's game. I think what last year's team really lacked, and the reason they just got bodied in that series, I mean, that was just an unexpected domination by the Celtics. And I still look back at that series, and I think the biggest reason Philadelphia was unable to compete is because you got Marco Bellinelli playing minutes at the 3. You got J.J. Redick playing minutes at the 3. And those guys are helping you space the floor. But they were just getting completely knocked on their defensively. It was unbelievable how Brown and Tatum and all of them were going at them. I wonder how Wilson Chandler is going to change that team, because he really is the only big difference going into next year for them.
Yeah, just to go back a little bit, what you were saying, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. A lot of people talk about how the Sixers needed to add some more offense this season, and I really don't think that was the problem in the Celtics series. The problem was that they didn't have enough two-way players, and they were just getting abused by, like you said, Tatum or whoever it might have been, just going at Redick, going at Bellinelli over and over again. And if you can play them off the floor like that, it not only hurts the Sixers spacing, it really limits what Ben Simmons can do on the floor, because he's not a scorer, he's a creator. And if you're going to play J.J. Redick off the floor, if you're going to play, Marco Bellinelli off the floor, it only hampers the entire offense in a sense that Ben can't do what he's best at.
Yeah, first, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't push back on the domination comment in the series.
4-1.
Yeah, it's 4-1, but, Game 3 went to overtime, and that was a game that the Sixers faithful had been kicking themselves over all summer long about that. They let that one slip away. Game 2 was, down to the final minute. It very easily could have been 2-2, or in a perfect world, even 3-1 heading into Game 5 in favor of the Sixers. But I know your Celtics blogs listeners don't want to hear me drone on about that. So to your point, I think Wilson Chandler is going to be a help defensively, as Kevin alluded to. He's a bigger guy. He can play some small 4 or at the small forward there. And he's just he's a vet. He's mobile enough. He's getting up there in age, but I think he's mobile enough to, in short stints, handle guards on the switching defenses that Brett Brown likes to employ. And I think another possibility down the road, and this certainly took a hit with his foot injury this summer, but was Zhaire Smith.
Yes,
he's the guy. Yeah, he was the guy with a lot of raw defensive potential. He played power forward at Texas Tech, but we've seen him in college and in brief stints in summer league where he was switching on to point guards even. So in an ideal world, he would have been developed into a guy that could switch between 3, maybe even 4 positions defensively. He was obviously very raw offensively, so he needs a lot of work on that end, and his Jones fracture injury is a big setback in that area. Maybe he comes back in late December, early January, and by the time the postseason rolls around, he's ready to go and a part of the rotation. So that's something
How does that keep happening? It's none of it's related, but it really is just so wacky. How Nerlens Noel, Jahlil Okafor, Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, Markelle Fultz, for all intents and purposes, pretty much every single player they've drafted in the process era has suffered a massive injury year one. How does that happen?
It's the baptism. It's the baptism to becoming a Sixer.
Yeah, there's a ritual that you go through to be initiated into the process. You have to trust the process, and that's it's like a trust fall. You get injured, and you have to fully embrace the trust of the process. I think of what it is. But yeah, it's just unbelievable bad luck. Like, who knows why these series of injuries have befallen this franchise. It's unbelievable.
I hear Jones fracture, and that's what Ben Simmons suffered closer to the season, obviously, but he missed the whole entire season. Are we going to see Smith this year?
Sean, correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think Ben suffered his injury about 2 months later than Zhaire. And also, Ben, I'm no doctor, obviously. Apparently what Ben had was a bonding of the bones that were in the vicinity of the injury, and that is what caused really the setback. As far as the bonding goes, it's, it varies person to person. It's not something that you can expect or foresee, and I think that's really the major reason that Ben ended up sitting out the whole season, and I think it was like maybe he could have played a few games in April, and if at that point it was like, what the hell, chalk it up. We'll go for Rookie of the Year next year and do that kind of thing. So, there's a narrative that he sat out just because of the Rookie of the Year. But he did have that, that bonding, whatever it was, the bonding of the bones during the healing that kind of caused a setback. So I think Zhaire, at the latest, I would expect early December. But just as we talked about how the Sixers have these bizarre injuries, they have these bizarre setbacks all the time. And there was an injury report released from the Sixers PR the other day that said, like, Zaire's on track, we'll update at a future time. And that's a load of nothing. It doesn't mean anything. And we've been getting the same thing every season now with, like you said, all these first-round injuries that go down. So I think his timetable for return is probably somewhere in November or December, but who knows?
The Celtics blog listeners are going to love that rookie comment you made.
Yeah, Bobby, as Kevin said, I heard a lot of the same things, that Simmons was actually ready to go in late January, early February, and it was a combination of the team still being in rebuild mode and losses helping them, and the Simmons camp really pushing to have Rookie of the Year eligibility maintained for the following season.
Isn't that something?
I think the Sixers are in a different place right now. Obviously they made the second round of the playoffs next year. They have similar or even higher aspirations this year. So I think once Zaire's healthy, he's going to be out there, and the timetable of 8 to 12 weeks is what they're looking at with it.
And let's be real. I mean, Zhaire doesn't have the skill set to win, Rookie of the Year or anything like that. They need him defensively on the court as soon as possible. There's no reason to lose anymore, and they need his depth. So I think that when he's healthy, he will get to go he'll get the full go.
Him and Robert Williams are interesting players long term in this rivalry, who probably aren't going to project to be big parts of it this year. But as far as this year goes, what are you guys expecting? 50 wins a year ago out of nowhere after the 28-win season. Deep dive into the playoffs in the second round. I mean, even though you guys were probably a little bit disappointed by how that series turned out, it still is massive growth off what they saw last year. But now, with how much the Celtics are gaining on top of the win that they accomplished over them last year, and then Toronto adding Kawhi Leonard, perhaps maintaining their spot in the East above them, what are you guys expecting from the team this year? It's going to be, even though it's a weaker conference, the two teams that are possibly above them look pretty strong from my vantage point.
We'll stick with possibly.
Yeah, I think, we're looking at, mid-50s again as far as a win total. As we discussed earlier, they didn't get that big free agent, so we're not looking at a leap where they're a guaranteed top 2 seed in the East. I mean, they're still going to have to stay relatively healthy, and they're still going to have to see some development from some of their young stars. But, last year they won 52, and now we'll have another year of development from Simmons and Embiid. Fultz was a non-factor, basically. He played about a dozen games last season, and he wasn't shooting any jumpers at all. If he gives us anything, that's got to be a positive as far as helping round out our rotation. And then, as we talked about, Wilson Chandler came in. They got a few other bench pieces to help the depth. So at the least, they should be as good as last season. And if we see some real jumps from their young stars, then, we could be talking 55, 56 wins maybe, and pushing Boston and Toronto for Eastern Conference supremacy. We'll see.
Who would win in a series between them and the Raptors?
That's tough. I don't even know. I mean, if I'm trying to think about how Toronto deploys Kawhi, and if you put him on Ben, that's going to give him some major issues. And if Fultz isn't, what we hope him to be, the Sixers don't have an initiator.
Yeah, I think the X factor is what do we have in Fultz? If Fultz is, if he's playing but he's not a factor, he's just like a seventh, eighth man, then I think the Raptors are the superior roster. But if Fultz is a guy that, he plays like a rookie would, that was, he won't be a rookie next year, but, a guy coming in for his first full season and he plays like a first overall pick, then I think they have the talent advantage over Toronto. And Kawhi and Simmons will probably cancel each other out for the most part. I know I'm not saying Simmons is as good as Kawhi, but I just don't think they would have any way to contend with Embiid down low. I mean, Valanciunas is too slow to deal with Embiid, and then anybody else they would try to throw at him, I think Embiid would just overpower them.
Let me ask you guys this. What do you think's more likely? Fultz is the prospect we saw at Washington, or Kawhi is the Kawhi we've known in the past?
I'm going to go with Kawhi. I'm pretty confident in Kawhi's ability to return. I love the lineups that they're going to be deploying up there. They have so many wings. They're going to look more like the Celtics than the 76ers do next year with all those wings that they can throw out on the court. And if they're smart, they'll play one center. The thing about Kawhi, I wonder, is after the leg injury, is he still going to be shooting threes at the ridiculous rate that he was before? Because what made him so great wasn't the defense. Like, the defense was a given, defensive player of the year, or the ball handling that spurred up. But he became nearly a 44% three-point shooter, which is just out of this world. So I'm interested to see if he gets back to that. Everything else, I think he can be relatively the same in that new environment.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm still kind of confused about, the real injury, its whole progression of it.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. But, if he is, the Kawhi of old, I think Toronto is right up there behind the Celtics as far as, odds on favorites to win the Eastern Conference.
And I love the risk. I love the trade. They were probably worse than the 76ers before that trade happened. And afterward, adding Danny Green, too. I have them above the Sixers this year in the standings. And they'll be right there with the Celtics, too, I think. They're the team I'm worried about, really.
Yeah, you touched on the roster construction. If OG Anunoby takes even...
Isn't it unbelievable the Spurs couldn't get him?
I know. That would have been kind of my starter in a package, but, they want to win right now. Back to my point. If OG can take a little bit of a leap offensively, they're, like you said, built like the Celtics. You got 3-4 players that can play guard or forward and kind of switch everything, and it makes for some really tough matchups.
Now over to the Celtics. It's pretty obvious what they're returning. Gordon Hayward, Irving, Baines is back, Smart's back. You can't ask for a quieter, safer offseason than that. They won by default just by keeping everything together and returning all this together. The Lakers getting LeBron's a big deal, but they're building something. The Celtics have something intact. They're going to be tough to mess with in the East. Is there any way anybody touches that roster? I don't think so, just from the perspective of Horford's just such a force in the playoffs that I think he's tough for anybody to match up with. Hayward, I'm a little hesitant about Hayward coming back off his injury, but I think at the very least he can shoot threes for them, which is a plus. And Irving's tough to match up with for anybody too, especially the 76ers. So I look at those three factors, and I'm not saying the Celtics are going to cruise to the finals, just blowing everybody away Warriors style, but I think they have enough to get through these series, say the way they did in 2008 when it was 6-7 games every series, but they had the will and the talent to get through it.
Yeah, I think if the Celtics stay healthy, they're the clear favorite in the East. There's no way around that. They got the top end talent. They got Irving, Hayward, Horford, all multiple time All-Stars. Hayward might not have been multiple times.
Hayward's one time.
One, yeah, because the West was so tough. The years he was really in his prime with Utah.
They're coming.
But yeah, you got your proven all-stars, you got your young studs with Tatum and Brown, and you got best coach in the league right now in Brad Stevens. So I don't think there's any way you could touch that. I think if you're somebody else in the East, you got to hope that they just don't stay healthy. Hayward's coming off a really serious injury, and we saw with Paul George, there's a little bit of a rust factor to break off of. Paul George wasn't really the Paul George of old, his first year back from his serious leg injury. And then Kyrie, I know people don't talk about this as much as I think they really should, but he's had multiple surgeries with that knee. Cleveland was pretty okay with just moving on from him, even though he was a young guy in his prime. I know there's the whole LeBron dynamic there, but you don't give up on blue chip point guards that are still, on the right side of 30 like they did. And I'm just a little worried for him and for everybody that just loves watching him play. That could be a degenerative thing with those knees. So, if you're someone else in the East, you're hoping they just don't stay healthy. But if they have their top 10 intact and ready to go in the spring, I don't see how they're not in the finals.
That is definitely a long-term concern with him. Cedric Maxwell, one of the team's announcers, said that too, that knees just don't get better with age. There's no way around that. But at this point, I think he can still come back and be an effective contributor this year. With how his progression's gone, he's feeling good about it. He's going to be ready to go full force once training camp gets there. So as far as this year, I'm not too concerned. But in the long term, that is a challenging thing for me. And I do think the biggest break for the 76ers right now in the long term is that I don't know what he's going to do this summer. I have no clue about it. He's given no indication about it. The Knicks rumor's floating. I don't buy that a ton, but I do buy the fact that he could leave Boston next year, just from the fact that players are their own entities nowadays. They aren't attached to organizations. Irving, the brand, could still survive in any city he wants, whether he's winning or losing. And if he just cares about his happiness, his brand, just being out there, and winning isn't as big of a concern for him, then I'm not going to put it past him to leave Boston, especially when he's given no security whatsoever that he's willing to stay. So that's my biggest fear long term in this rivalry.
Wait, are you saying that Kyrie wouldn't be in a winning situation if he went to the New York Knicks? I'm just messing with you. I think that would be such a bad move for him if he were to leave Boston. I mean,
he would have a tough time living that down.
I don't know. It's such a weird situation. I can't figure out, that whole affinity for the Knicks. I mean, I get it. Like you said, his brand will carry him anywhere. But if I'm Kyrie, I'm looking to stay in Boston long term.
Wherever he goes, he has Uncle Drew too in the pipeline. So he's always got that to fall back on.
I'm not wildly concerned at this point.
There's that narrative about him and Butler want to pair up, or him and Durant want to pair up. So I don't know. Who knows?
I'm not so sold on the Knicks. Maybe there's a sleeper destination out there that I haven't thought about too much. I think the only reason the Knicks are out there is because that's where he's from. I mean, he's from New Jersey technically, but it's an intriguing conversation. I'm sure that's what the 76ers are rooting for, because the backup plan at that point becomes Terry Rozier, and that's a far cry from Irving. So Liberty Ballers, Celtics blog teaming up all week long. We have a mailbag going. We have a Ben Simmons article up, and there is more to come all week long. I do have some mailbag questions from Celtics blog that we can hit on. I'll throw them at you guys. We'll fire them out real quick, one at a time for each of you. For Kevin, I guess. Was the confetti guy fired?
I don't know. I kind of feel like maybe he was like an intern or something like that. If it was me, I wouldn't fire the guy. I'd probably just relegate him to maybe like food concessions or something like that. So I hope the guy didn't lose his job, but I haven't really gotten to the bottom of that.
Mr. 13 says, who gives two craps about the 76ers? This is a Celtics site. For Sean, does losing Ilyasova, Bellinelli, and essentially Booker for nothing concern you with the bench shooting and the ability to retain Embiid? I don't get the second part of that question, but does losing Ilyasova, Bellinelli, and Booker, I guess, concern you for depth purposes?
A little bit. Booker, obviously, they released during the season last year, so he wasn't really even in the playoff rotation. But yeah, Ilyasova and Bellinelli were both guys that helped space the floor a lot, which is something critical when you have a point guard who doesn't shoot at all. And you have your other best player is a center, and he plays, I know Embiid shoots some from the outside, but he's predominantly in the post, so you need guys to space the floor around him as well. Bellinelli doesn't really worry me just because, we saw in that Boston series when he was exposed defensively how much it hurt the team because they were just picking on him and it was easy points. So as much as he was helping offensively, he was hurting even more on the defensive end. Ilyasova is really the guy I think will come back to bite the team, not having him around. Not only was he able to space the floor, but he gave them a unique wrinkle where they were playing him a lot as a small ball center, and he was kind of they were playing a 3-man rotation in the front court with Embiid, Dario, and Ilyasova, and that Dario Ersan front court was actually really effective. They were both able to space the floor, and they are both good enough rebounders to kind of get by on that end. And Ilyasova is he's stocky enough down low to kind of body up bigger opponents. And he did a good enough job cleaning the glass that it kind of worked. I don't know how exactly they're going to replace his minutes in that capacity. They're going to do a little bit more of Wilson Chandler and Robert Covington as small ball fours. They're going to have Mike Muscala thrown in there. Well, we'll see what they get from him. But if I had to say one thing that I think they'll be worse off this year than they were last year as a result of all the offseason changes, it would be losing Ilyasova in that kind of small ball 5 capacity that they were using him in for 10 minutes a game.
Kevin, another fireball for you here. In an alternative universe where Brian Colangelo does not get outed and remains in charge, how does the 76ers offseason go differently?
Oh my gosh. It probably honestly doesn't change a whole lot other than giving JJ Redick probably twice the amount of money that he got now. And then probably Bielitsa would actually end up signing with the Sixers as he would have gotten a little more money and probably a little more years. But on a serious note, I'm not a fan of Brian Colangelo, and I think, you see his type of maneuvers when you look at someone like Jared Bayless or, paying JJ Redick $23 million a year. He's somebody that is looking to kind of bring in a quote unquote veteran presence and, call it stability. But really what it is kind of moves that are lateral, and, you're bringing in mediocre players. And not that the Sixers have made too much of a splash this summer, but they've preserved a huge amount of flexibility financially speaking. I think they'll have something like $44 million going into next summer. I don't know. I think Brian, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I think he could have, had the foresight to know that next summer would be their last chance to really strike. So I don't think it would have changed too much, but maybe Mikal Bridges is still a Sixer. I think that might be more likely than, the value move that the Sixers made and getting Zhaire and that 2021 pick. So maybe, that kind of, I would say that might be the biggest difference. I don't know if that's a Brian Colangelo type of move to move someone like Mikal, who's seen, more as an instant upgrade on the depth chart than, compared to Zhaire, and get that future pick. So I think maybe that's probably the area I would say that, really doesn't happen. Other than that, I don't know. The Wilson Chandler trade is something that I didn't like and something that I think is something Brian Colangelo would do. So honestly, I don't think it changes too much, but maybe some veterans get a little more money, and, maybe Mikal Bridges is still a Sixer and the Sixers don't have that asset in 2021.
I gave them a lot of credit for the Bridges pick, and then next thing I know, he's not even on the 76ers. That's how draft night went for me. I wouldn't have done that trade if I was picking up a long-term pick's nice, but I feel like a player who won championships at the college level and was a little bit more seasoned in Bridges would have helped a team that needs a little bit more media help. Sean, last questions for you. Fultz, is there any situation where you would deal him, and how long of a leash do you think there'll be on his development? Say if he starts struggling again this year, is there going to be concerns and a move made on him if there aren't any immediate improvements?
I don't think there's going to be a move made on him. Right now, his value is at an all-time low. So if he was to struggle out of the gate, there's nothing you can do except keep throwing him out there and hope that he, rights the ship. You're not going to trade him. I don't know what you would get for him, but it would be a package commensurate with his talent level. I would trade him, but I wouldn't do that until, potentially down the road when he's reestablished that he is capable of being a threat on all three levels of the offensive end and shown kind of that defensive versatility we discussed a little bit earlier. Then, if you rebuild his value, then you can start thinking about it. That it's a league where no one's untouchable. But yeah, I think they'll throw him out there and they'll hope that everything Drew Hanlon has said this summer is the truth, and he's ready to be that player we all hoped he would be when he first arrived in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I just to add on that, they're going to live by Fultz or die by Fultz.
There you have it. That is 76ers Celtics week. Kevin Love is the last one you heard. Sean Kennedy before him. You can check out their work on both Celtics Blog and Liberty Ballers this week as we continue to team up through the end of it. Guys, I'm sure I'll talk to you again this year. Plenty.
Thanks for having me on, Bobby. I had a lot of fun talking about this rivalry, and I'm looking forward to the season. Hopefully we can chat a little more once the season starts.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Bobby. And it's been a fun week. I've enjoyed talking with you guys and being friendly until October rolls around and we can be at each other's throats again.
Good night, everybody.
Reunion Arena in Dallas, where the Mavs and Lakers are playing tonight, was built in 1980. Now, you couldn't ask for a better facility. It's easily accessible, has all the comforts of a theater, and there isn't a bad seat in the house. But for some reason, there are those who prefer the Boston Garden, mostly those who wear Celtic green.
What is so special about the Boston Garden other than the fact that it's 1,000 years old? Let's take a look. First of all, a garden it's not. It's a train station, really. One flight up and you're on the fabled parquet floor. Now, before you get all misty-eyed about the parquet, take a closer look.